We're here because of God's grace. It's through God's love and grace that we acknowledge the First Nations people on whose land we meet. We acknowledge their care for country, land, oceans, and waters. We acknowledge elders past, present, and future. We acknowledge past injustices. And we acknowledge the need through Jesus and with Jesus to work towards conciliation. You've found the Next Steps podcast from Citywide Baptist Church, where we go deeper and wrestle with the stuff we talk about on a Sunday morning. So please join us as we take next steps together. Hello, and welcome to the Next Steps podcast from Citywide Baptist Church. I'm Matt, I'm your host. Joining me today are Mitchell, Matt Garvin, our pastor, and Gus, a retired elder from Citywide Baptist Church. We're recording this episode on Monday, the 1st of November, and you'll be able to find it and download it on Wednesday, the 3rd of November. Welcome, guys. Matt, tell us about what we got into yesterday at Citywide.
Well, I didn't actually get to Citywide. Obviously, I was watching the TV, but the message was focused in and around completing the loop of We've got this diagram we've been bouncing off, and the final stop on that diagram is act, just doing stuff. And I started by bouncing off what Jesus was saying in Matthew 5:14, where he calls us to be the light of the world. And he says, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. What he seems to be saying is that our light is related to what we do, that people see our behaviour, and our behaviour is meant to stand out. I think through the Reformation, there was a real emphasis on grace versus works, and people were very worried about focusing too much on what you do. But it's very clear for Jesus. He focuses on what we do. In fact, he actually says, anyone who sets aside my commands will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But he then goes on and says, anyone who practices or puts them into practice on a repetitive basis, and also teaches others to do the same, teaches these commands, will be called greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And he says, you guys, your righteousness has to surpass that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And later on in the book of Matthew, I think he explains why he says that, where he says, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but don't do what they do, because they don't practice what they preach. And it occurred to me, we often talk about practicing what you preach. This is actually where that phrase in the English language comes from, Matthew chapter 23, verse 2. And I love that in Australia, people are hypersensitive to bulldust. They're hypersensitive to whether you say one thing and do another. In other cultures, it's not quite as focused as that. We are the only country with a phrase like fair dinkum, which really means that your words and your actions line up. And I think that at that level, the Australian culture is almost a bit Jewish, in that the idea that you can be a good bloke and not do what you say is just anathema to Australians. You can't. It doesn't work that way. A good bloke is someone who does what they say, whose words and actions line up. And I think we in the church have to face the fact that often the charge in our culture laid against us is that we're hypocrites. We say one thing and do another, and there's some real tragic examples of that. And I think what is on my heart for our church and for our city is that people would find hope in Jesus. And I think the only way that works is if we live it, if it comes out in our behaviour. And we took it from that, just about the doing, and in the diagram we said, like, if you repetitively do something, it becomes a habit. And there's this little proverb that says, sow a thought, reap an action, sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny. Like, this stuff isn't rocket science. It's ultimately, you got to do it. You got to do it. I quoted Paul in 1 Corinthians 9 where he says, in a race, all the runners run, but only one person gets the prize. So you've got to run in such a way as to get the prize. And he says, how do you do that? He says, you train yourself. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. That I would love, there's part of me that would just love to be a church where everything was just inspirational and mountaintop moments, and you felt good the moment you walked in the door and stuff. But I actually don't. What I'm aspiring for Citywide to be is not that. Despite the fact that it would be kind of fun to be like that, what I'm aspiring for Citywide to be is a church that is like a gymnasium. That's a training centre where we're learning to do to live out in our lives the truth of the gospel, and not just talk about it. And so that's why we've got these little cards we've been putting out that sort of help people think through some of the spiritual disciplines. And ultimately, when you boil it down, this is the core question of our faith. What does it mean to actually do it? And often we can know what we need to be doing, but we put it off. And Dan was using the example of, there's a very simple thing he could have done in his backyard, which he put off. This is a classic example for so many people. They know all the bits and pieces they need to do in their house, but it's not until you get your house ready for sale that you get around to doing it. And you think, why didn't I do this earlier? It would have been so much better. I could have enjoyed my house much better if I'd actually done it and lived in it. But he was reflecting on the example of just how important it is just to do it. There are things in our lives we know we ought to be doing. And I think what Jesus' words would be to us are stop stuffing around. Do it. Just do it. To borrow a tag from Nike, but I think that's the heart of what Jesus' message is, and it's confronting, because often doing it requires us to do what doesn't feel natural or normal or even nice. Like, nothing about loving your enemies is going to be fun, or being patient, or a lot of Jesus' teaching is just confronting, and it means actually facing there's part of you that wants to do something that feels a bit more comfortable, but Jesus calls you out to do something different. And so that's what we were talking about on Sunday, mate. What does it mean to actually put our faith into practice, and for it to then become habit that changes our character?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Gus, first, welcome to the podcast. And look, you've been around the traps at Citywide. You've seen the church community go through a lot of different seasons and changes. Just how does this land for you, what Matt's sharing with us today?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's interesting. I think I've been involved in different churches since I was a little kid, and probably a bit more engaged in a formal church since I moved to Tassie 20 years ago. So, I have some background in this, but this is probably the last couple of years has been the first time where I feel a lot of the movement and a lot of the expectation and what, the desire, certainly the stated desire from Matt, from the leadership, but also from those that are sort of trying to build the community, is actually trying to sort of reflect some of Jesus' practices, behaviours, teachings, not just learn and not just take it from being theory, knowing good stuff and listening to good stuff, but actually having it influence your life in a much tangible, visible way, to the extent that you can have conversations about it. So yeah, I think this is, for me, it's just part of a journey that we've been on for a little while. The whole notion of habits and practicing something is a bit tricky, because I'm quite good at some things, but there's lots of things I'm crap at, and I've always been. And to think that, if there are things I should master and be better at, that I need to just start putting that into practice, that's challenging, because it's not going to be particularly easy, and I might fail, and I won't achieve the level of improvement or the level of result that I really like to. So yeah, I find that whole concept is also got a fair bit of challenge in it, but I'm excited by it as well. So I want to give it a go.
Yeah, thanks, Gus. Yeah, Mitchell, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just heard Matt talk about spiritual disciplines before, and I was just hoping to ask you guys, like, what are some examples of spiritual disciplines that you guys have actually enacted throughout your lives that others may be able to copy or maybe look to as inspiration for them to then enact themselves?
It's a great question. Matt?
There's two levels to it. One of the things with the spiritual disciplines, I worried about saying this is how I do it, therefore this is how you should do it. In that, what I find is the Holy Spirit seems to meet me where I'm at and gradually help me face a thing at a time. That's why we've got these little guides for the different behaviours, and even those little guides are they really just ask questions, and they don't say this is how you should do it, that they sort of get you thinking stuff through. But in terms of, for me, there's been a number of things that have been really important for me. I think I was more shaped by the evangelical culture than I realised. And I realised that in the evangelical culture, there's this sense that you've got to feel it to do it. Like there's something wrong about praying a written out prayer because it's not coming from your heart, or it's got to come from who you are. And so that's why often I've just, for me, I didn't really, sometimes I'd be sitting down with my Bible and I just didn't feel it. I thought, this is boring. And so I went and did something else. And I had to gradually, for me, the first real spiritual discipline probably was just sitting, finally realising it helps if my first cup of coffee is connected with my Bible. And I just reading through my Bible every morning, and in that trying to create space to do a bit of prayer and journaling. What I mean by journaling is just writing down what's coming into my head, what's sticking out, and often it's a mixture of getting out the crap as well as hearing what God's saying. So it's really messy, and I'd be terrified for anybody to actually read what I'm writing, because it's not my best. But that stuff, like I think, has been an example of getting some spiritual disciplines in place. Later on, the thing of a Sabbath and having a day off has been a really important part for me too, and also in that making time to be one-on-one and for me having a date night was actually a spiritual discipline. Actually having a time with Leanne was actually a bit of a spiritual discipline. I don't think there's a limited list. I think that it's kind of the Holy Spirit will lead you to, okay, what are some of the things you got to work on in order to deal with stuff. Another one, I got addicted to porn early on, which is I'm not real proud about, and so I had to develop the discipline of being accountable with that, and I put software on my computer, and I'm pleased to say it's no longer for me a major issue, but that was a big deal that was affecting a whole lot of my spiritual journey, and I felt horrible. Just felt sort of like a hypocrite. So I had to get some disciplines in place to manage that. So I think that's a long way of saying I think there's a bunch of different things that have been kind of building blocks, but I feel like I've still got a long way to go with a bunch of other things.
Gus, did you have anything to share on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an interesting question, Mitch, and I'll deflect a little bit because, actual disciplines versus, life, the way I should just be doing things, I don't make a massive distinction between them. But, one thing for me that I've been and think about from time to time is this notion of what I think of as congruence. That sort of, the notion that what you think and what you say and the way you behave actually has to align with the way you show up for people. So you can't sort of, espouse certain things and then, but then not reflect that in the way you behave. And, a particular area for that's challenging for me is, I'm not very good at saying no. I do say yes to things a lot. People ask me to do things or be involved or whatever, and I'll often agree. So when I say yes, best intentions, but am I actually committing to doing what it is I've said I will do? And when you don't do that, or you do that habitually, it just tends towards just letting people down. And I hate that feeling. I really don't like feeling that I've let people down, family, friends, work, etc. And I guess I had to realise that, when I say yes to something or I agree to take something on, oftentimes I'm not actually making a commitment. I'm just sort of putting an intent, but intent's not good enough. And I hate it when people say, you promised something, because I say, oh, and I didn't really promise, yeah, I said I'd be there, but, and really it's not good enough. I mean, if you say something, you may as well call it a promise. And if that's the thing that makes you feel a bit more committed to it, then stick to it. So then I have to be a lot more, I suppose, careful about what I do agree to, so that, I can actually think of it as a promise, not just as a, best endeavours type thing. And so that's a continuing challenge for me. And one way to deal with, one way I've got through a lot of my life is maybe not do everything to the standard or to the level or whatever that I'd like to, just, do a bit of things and like have a dip. But even then, it's still not really good enough. Like if you actually promise to do something for someone, or you join a group, you've made a tacit agreement to do what it takes to be in that, and you've got to stick to it. So yeah, that's one thing that I'm working on. I've been at this for a while and I haven't quite got that right yet, but it's something that I'm regularly challenged about.
Yeah, thanks, Gus. Yeah, Mitchell, I think my answer, I would lean on the side of really encouraging people to just have a go at some things. Like I actually did a unit as part of my studies at Alpha Crucis College called Spiritual Disciplines, where we looked at all kinds of different things that people do. And, there were things like listening prayer was one. That was one we talked about a lot at Citywide a couple of years ago, and it can be useful to try some things out, and some things will feel, yeah, this is me. This works for me and I can do this thing. And other things won't feel right. And then also, like Matt said, sometimes it's not about how it feels. Sometimes it's about, well, is this actually doing something for me? I guess for me, I was only talking last week, Mitch, when you were away, about how the last couple of years I've started the year with the intent I'm going to read through the Bible in a year. And I'd done the math. I'd worked out how many pages I had to read every day on my Bible to get through the whole year, and be great for a couple of months. And then I'd miss a day or two. And then I'd sort of feel like, it's wrecked now. I can't do it. And so I would encourage you, like, if you're going to do something like that, be kind to yourself and realize that, you don't always quite hit it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep plugging away at it. The other thing I'd say is, for me, the big one is always trying to start everything I do with prayer. Like it sounds like it should almost go without saying, but it doesn't. Even as Christians, the amount of times we try to do something important and we sort of don't actually ask God to be with us in it. So yeah, that's one of my big ones. Yeah.
No, thanks, guys. That was actually really awesome to hear what you've got to say and the things you suggested. And I thought it was actually interesting how there is no set of particular spiritual disciplines that are good or that should be done. Because that's something I think I've struggled with, I think, in the last couple of years when I've decided to take my faith a lot more seriously, is that acting part and spending time with God. I just didn't really know how to actually go about it. Like I tried potentially listening to podcasts, or I tried just, reading random bits of the Bible or something, and nothing really stuck. So I think that's actually encouraging to just understand that may just happen to people, and you need to keep going and, persisting to find different ways of achieving that.
I think it would be fair to say too, I don't know whether Matt and Gus, you want to weigh in on this, but I think it would be fair to say too that in different seasons of your life, a different discipline might be required.
Yeah. Look, I'm sure that you're always on a journey, and that God's always, like, even for me, my quiet time changes up. I think there are three things, though, that you do need, but how they're expressed can be different. I think you need fellowship. Like, you need people who you can be honest with, and who you can pray for, and they can pray for you. I think you need prayer, however that works for you. Like, and for me, I feel like I'm still a country mile from where I want to be with prayer. But there's not much point talking about a relationship with God unless you're talking to God. So that's. However, and I think that'll always be something you get. You'll develop, and it'll keep them changing. And I do think you need, at some level, to be getting into the Word of God, like, to be getting into the Bible. Whether, like, for me, it was really helpful to listen through the Bible for a year, or people engage with it differently, or just, so for some people it's just the verse of the day that pops up on the Bible app, or others, like, I'm finding it helpful to read through. Whatever, but you need some input that is from the Bible, that sort of is a bit of a counterbalance. And in all that, what we're saying with that diagram is, somehow you need to create space to reflect. And then from there, the other stuff will happen. If you're just being carried along by life, it's going to be hard to have any kind of relationship with God. You need some kind of space somewhere to let the dust settle and hear the Spirit. But what we're saying with all these different, these are all different things that help get you down that path, and those paths. And you need, and there are different disciplines. And one of the things that I'm appreciating is a guy by the name of John Mark Comer, who Gus has read one of his books recently. He's just got a brand new book out about the spiritual battle we're in, and there's an old Christian understanding that says that there are three forces out to take you away from God, that you will experience resistance, that as you step forward and try to reach out to Jesus, you will experience resistance, because there is forces that are trying to pull you back. And those three forces the Bible talks about are the world, the system that sets itself up to say this is what you need in order to be okay, the flesh, the part of you that just wants to be comfortable and safe, and the devil. And what the Bible makes clear is his main weapon is lies. And sometimes you'll get these thoughts come into your head that feel like they almost have a will of their own. They want to be thought, and it's like, and it's these, when you feel like you have these random thoughts that come into your head that want to take you down an unhelpful place. The early church would be saying, well, that's an indication that there's a bit of an attack going on. The enemy's trying to get in and affect your mind and your heart. And so I think it's helpful to realise it's not just, that's why these spiritual disciplines are so important. It's not just about you, that the Bible makes it clear that there are forces who want to take you away from God, and you need the fellowship, prayer, and the Word of God to help keep you heading in the right direction. And that's why just trying to live a world where you're just having nice feelings and operating from your feeling world, it just doesn't work. That's why the disciplines are so important. So it's a long ramble, and I forget the name of John Mark Comer's new book. I'm looking forward to getting it, but it's about all this stuff that we're talking about.
It's certainly something that resonates with me, Matt. I know I've shared before, being involved in church leadership is something that I've been doing for the last couple of years. And I regularly, have these feelings of, like I call it sort of an imposter syndrome sort of feeling of like, you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't be here. And what you realize when you really think about it is, there's someone who's got an interest in me feeling this way, and that's it's not me. yeah, those things aren't coming from me. But I think when we're in a position where we're not grounded and we're not, like you said, where we're not engaging in fellowship, where we're not secure in our relationship with Jesus, where something like that can really knock us off course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, Mitch, as you were describing that, struck me that there's a lot of things that we try and do, to try and get better at. So you commit to doing something. And most things that you have a go at, they're sort of interesting at first. There's a little bit of an entertaining, engaging phase. But then a lot of things at some point that wears off and they become a bit boring or a bit mundane, or it's not pushing your buttons or whatever. And one thing I've tried to do is not give up just because something's boring or the gloss has gone off it. You don't have to keep doing everything all the time, but stop doing something when it's the right thing to stop, or when it's not the right thing to keep doing. Don't just stop it because it got boring, or the sexy part of it finished, because that's often not going to be very helpful. So if you sort of push through that, then at some stage later, you can actually make a decision, but it's not just based on giving up type thing. And I found that helpful with some things. And one way to that Matt mentioned, one way to sort of keep you honest about that is actually tell people what you're going to try and do. So if you share that with a group of people that you trust, that won't, they won't bag you out if you do the wrong thing, but I mean, they'll keep you accountable to it. And so, if you tell someone, I plan to do X, this is a change I want to make, then if they touch base with you from time to time, if you've given that up just because you got sick of it, it's like, oh, okay, did you think that wasn't worth doing anymore? And so I find that quite a helpful thing. And as I say, not everything goes forever, but at least if you can be in charge of the decisions, then, that's a good thing.
It is a great thing when you can have, and generally we don't have a whole ton of them, but when you can have just a few companions in your journey who you can really hold one another accountable, it's very helpful.
It's been important for me. Like, I actually knew coming to the church I was going to need that. So I collared Gus and another guy, Mark, and then there's Phil and now Harm. And so we catch up once a week. And I don't think you can share your whole story with everybody, but you need a few people who you're gradually on the journey with, and it's messy. It's not like when we catch up, it's a neat and tidy kind of well thought out agenda or anything like that. The conversation ranges all over the place, and at different times one person will be having a harder time than other people, or and sometimes there'll be a theme that we're all sort of going through stuff, but I know for me, just having that regular rhythm of where someone's going to ask you how you're going, and you've got to work that out. Because often for me, I don't actually know how I'm going. I don't often stop to think about it. So all that stuff matters. So yeah, that's one of the things I'm really keen on. We call those kingdom cells. I really hope that we can normalise that in our church, that everybody has that level of fellowship with a few people, because I think it is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, you talked about one of the real challenges we have, particularly today, is this idea that Christians, or the capital C church, has often not practiced what it preached. I'm just wondering, practically, what do we do about that? Well, how do we face that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a cultural thing, and I think it comes out of the battle we're in. But I do think there's been a particular emphasis that's come through the Reformation, where people are worried about anything that smacks of works, which is interesting because the Bible itself says faith without works is dead. So I think we've overcorrected with that. But I do think we've got to get back to normalizing the idea that our faith isn't our faith isn't a spectator sport, and church isn't something where we come to just have a religious experience. We need to normalise the idea that there are disciplines, and also we try and do things where we as a church encourage each other to connect with our neighbours, or at Christmas time do something in the local paddock, or at Anzac Day. We try and do things where we put it into practice, and where we'll cancel church and go and serve the community. It's a journey, and it's uncomfortable, and I think there's a whole lot of, that's why we've got these acronyms up the front of the church on these banners that say follow, bless and share, and I think those behaviours sort of capture it, like the share, even the very first letter of share, speaking the truth in love. Just doing that is unusual, and I think that's because we tend to avoid conflict unless it's through, as we said last week, through bombing people on Facebook or something. Like I think this is the real dilemma we're in. I had this really encouraging conversation, but challenging conversation with many of the local pastors here. When we got together, and all of us were saying the great challenge we have is Jesus said that we're to go and make disciples, not go and make Christians, and that we've been focused on making Christians, but not enough people have been disciplined or discipled by Jesus so that their lives reflect him, so that it's not been acted out. And so we have a whole lot of immature Christians and immaturity is, as Paul defines it in Ephesians 4, this place where your actions are determined by your circumstances. So a little baby is hungry, so it cries, or it's cold, so it cries. Its actions are determined by its circumstances, whereas maturity is that you are not thrown around on the waves like a cork, is what Paul would say. A mature person has a rudder, is able to steer their life. And talking with local pastors here, there was this just general sense that we've got to rethink how we do church, because we're not producing enough of that.
Mitchell, as a younger person who's sort of stepping into some of this stuff for the first time as a young adult, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I've found maybe the last year or two, I think, as I said, as I've been taking my faith more seriously, I've found that as you guys were talking before, fellowship has been incredibly helpful in that journey with the young adults group I've got, and also chatting to perhaps older people in the church, and even engaging in this podcast has actually been really helpful for me to just talk about the topics that are talked about on Sunday, but then break them down in, I guess, a non-presentational way. I think is really great for me. But in terms of discipleship and heading into this new age, I find it's been a bit not necessarily overwhelming, but it's been an interesting experience through just a lack of, I guess, experience and just trying to find out how to do things on my own, I guess. And I guess that's just generally just maturing. And in that experience, I've tried, as I said, many different things in engaging with Jesus and, going through and trying to read my Bible more and stuff like that. But there's always just been different things in that journey that have not necessarily kept me back, but have hindered that experience. And so I'm trying to, as Matt is saying, be in charge of the ship and continue to be able to go through despite the circumstances that I may be in.
Yeah, great. Gus, what's been your experience of this stuff that Matt's been talking about the sort of cultural struggle that we've been involved in with trying to have disciples and mature Christians, not baby Christians. What's been your experience of that in your time?
Yeah, maybe slightly tangential to that question, but I've been thinking a bit recently about some of the different terminology, and Matt's mentioned it a few times, and we've talked about it a couple of times. This thing about discipleship, what does that actually mean? And maybe a better term for that, or what actually Jesus meant when he says to people, follow me, it's got much more of a lens of apprenticeship. And, I work with a lot of apprentices in the hydro. I've worked alongside them. And this book, John Mark Comer's book, God Has a Name, does talk also a bit about apprenticeship and what actually Jesus was hinting at when he said that, used that term. I can't remember what the actual biblical word was, but it doesn't really matter. But it's sort of interesting because when I get to meet apprentices, there's a sort of an assumption that you have to come to an apprenticeship without an assumption that you already know stuff, that you already know how to do it all. You've got to come with an assumption of, well, I want to learn, I want to understand. You sort of have to start from the ground up. It's a bit of and that even mature age apprentices, when they come, you do have to almost, humble yourself a little bit to actually be prepared to be told and be taught and be shown and observe and to practice and all that sort of stuff. So it's a bit of I think that's a challenge in our society, particularly if you're not, if you're, 13 or 14 or something, maybe, and someone's going to show you how to do something great. Or if you're a 17-year-old apprentice and someone's going to show you how to, clamp two bits of metal together, that's fine. But when you're, 25 or 30 or 40 or 50, actually seeing yourself as an apprentice, as in, I need to be shown what to do, or I need to be taught how to go about this, does require some sort of humility. And, I don't think any of us are beyond that, even if you've been a Christian for a number of, long time. There's an element of apprenticeship, as in, I don't have all the answers, so therefore, I need to be shown. And Jesus has lots of different ways of showing us things. Some of it's direct, to you through the Spirit. Some of it's through the Word. Some of it's through others. Some of it can be through, creation. There's lots of different ways, but you don't want to be taking with you an assumption that you already know stuff, because that's a bit risky. Then you're sort of doing it all in your own strength. And then when things don't work and you fail or you fall on your face, you've only got yourself to blame if you did it via your own endeavours. So, yeah, I think that's something I've been thinking about a bit in discipleship recently.
I think it's very true. I mean, I think I was just sitting here listening to you talk, Gus, and I'm reflecting on my own experience over the last few years being a student at Bible college, and then really in a lot of ways feeling apprenticed to people like Matt and Dan, and even yourself, feeling apprenticed to you guys in terms of looking at how do you do things from a pastoral point of view, how do you do things from a church leadership point of view. And it takes humility, because you sometimes you're proud and you think, well, I'm smart, I know how to do stuff, but it's not about how smart you are, because there are people who've got lived experience. And then it's also interesting that while we often can find ourselves in this role of being an apprentice, we're often also apprenticing other people at the same time. Because I know I find myself in the position of leading youth ministry, working with someone like Mitch, feeling quite a lot of responsibility for helping him in his journey. So it is this idea of, we're sometimes we're being led and sometimes we're leading at the same time even.
And I think I've experienced a lot of that as well, that, you can be playing more than one role at any one time. Yeah.
And I guess, Matt, that's another one of these tensions where when we talk about this stuff, when we talk about community stuff, we nearly always come back to this. I think every episode of the podcast so far, the term "it's a tension" has come up. But this is another tension, isn't it? In between leading and following sometimes at the same time.
Yeah, that's why I love what Gus was saying. For me, we don't have to worry so much in that if we're focusing on Jesus and we're apprenticing to him, then we don't have to worry so much about what we're doing and whether, because sometimes it'll be right for me to step forward, sometimes it'll be right for me to step back, and that'll be determined by the question, what would Jesus do if he was in my circumstance, in this scenario I'm in right now? And so, yep, there'll be an additional responsibility for people who are a few steps behind us. There might be less responsibility for people who are a few steps ahead of us. But that can change too. So I do, we've got to live in this tension, and live in the tension of between where I am and where Jesus is. And there's a country mile between where I am and where Jesus is. But I still am reaching for him, and somehow he promises to be with us in all that, and not to beat us over the head for not being perfect, but to help us grab our. I think he promises to grab our hand. Yeah,
and that's why it's good that it's a journey, Matt, to go that country mile.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So, Matt, what are we going to be talking about at church this Sunday?
So this coming Sunday, we're going to, for the last time, look at this diagram again. For the last time in this sermon series, anyway. I think we'll keep coming back to it, and ask the question: okay, so what? What does this mean for us actually? What does this mean for us individually and as a church? And we will sort of take the next steps in terms of unpacking the whole diagram and saying, okay, what does it mean for us to put this into practice? And then point towards where we'll be heading in terms of what does it mean for us to be a church that encourages all of us to be taking this journey to grow in faith and focusing on Jesus and being led by Jesus.
That sounds awesome. All right. Well, I want to thank all you guys for joining us. And please, when you find the podcast, share, like, comment, send us your questions. We really want to have your questions. And we'll see you all next week.